everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 11 of season 2 of Vinland Saga. And the last two episodes, 9 and 10, maybe two of my favorite episodes in the series. They were so good. They're definitely in my top 5. I would say episodes 9 and 10, Oath, and then The Cursed Head are two of my favorite episodes in the whole series. I mean, it is hard to beat episode 24 of season 1. That episode's amazing. But this is right there up there with them. Yeah, because we're setting up the foils that are Canute and Thorfin, and they don't even know that they're foils yet. That's kind of the cool thing. They don't even realize what each other is doing. And so I have quite a few comments that I want to dive into before we start this episode, but I've really loved Vinland Saga the second season, and seeing Thorfin blossom into this young man who now has found a purpose. Seemingly it's still a work in progress, but he's found a purpose. And what's interesting, and I talked at length about him and Canute in the last episode, is that Thorfin, I feel like, is coming onto his own mentally better than Canute, but his own sense of purpose is still being refined, right? Whereas Canute, on the other hand, has a very clear purpose and a very clear plan, but his mental state is, I would argue, not in the best shape in comparison to Thorfin's at this time. So we need to talk about that before we begin. But Whoosh and Sweebian noted that the voice actor for Harald, last episode, I was like, I know that voice actor. I know it. Who is it? And they were like, the voice actor is Harald, the same voice actor as Albert from Moriarty the Patriot. I was like, of course. I can hear Albert now. It all makes sense. So thank you for that. Edgar was noting in the Discord that the only man Canute has killed so far, technically, is Askeladd. And I was like, oh, yeah. Technically, the only man we've seen Canute outright kill was Askeladd, which is the only person that Thorfin wanted to kill. So it's like the poetry, the parallels, right? That's the only one Thorfin wanted to kill. But here's the thing. I questioned in the last episode, we were talking about in the Discord, about why Canute is not haunted by Askeladd versus Thorfin seems to carry him with him everywhere he goes. And someone in the Discord was like, yeah, Askeladd's like, I'm gonna go hang out with this kid. He seems less of a red flag than you. And it's like, ah! But honestly, Canute knew Askeladd wanted Canute to kill him at that point. Everything was orchestrated and set up to lead up to the point where Canute was going to have to kill Askeladd. And Askeladd at that point had accepted the fact that he wanted Canute to be his king, and had set it up to be like, you're the man I'm willing to die for, as my mother predicted. So here we are. And so there's really not a sense of Canute being haunted by Askeladd, because Askeladd wanted that to happen. So, whereas Thorfin has no clue about that predetermined plan. He has no idea that Canute was set up to kill Askeladd. He has no idea what was going on. He had no clue about the coup d'etat. Nothing. He just shows up at the moment Askeladd dies by Canute's hand and is like, what the fudge, man? We had a thing. And then that led to the end of the season. So it's just like Thorfin is totally in the dark when it comes to that entire moment in history. And Canute had all of the inside knowledge. So again, total opposites. It's just the parallels are like galaxy brain level, and I'm loving them. So that was really interesting. But Rainhead of Shadow Clan noted this really cool symbolic thing, that in the chasm in episode 9, it's technically dug by Thorfin's dagger. And in that comment, they said that it's kind of like a symbolic representation that Thorfin dug the hole himself. He's dug this pit himself that he's fallen into. But also, at one point during the episode, as the dagger is falling and Thorfin's being grabbed by all the dead bodies, the dagger is within reach. So if Thorfin let go of the ledge and grabbed the dagger, he could have gotten it to fight off the dead bodies clinging to him. But in doing so, he would have lost the strength and fallen into the pit. So it is a visual, symbolic representation of how choosing violence will lead you to fall back into that pit and not be able to claw yourself out. It is like the perfect metaphor. I was like, that is so fantastic. And then before, the dagger itself was always considered by Thorfin to be a memento of his father's. He's like, I have to carry this with me. It was my father's dagger. That's the sentiment that it has to me. However, as the series goes on, and in the past, Thorfin in the present looking back is realizing that the dagger was not a memento of his father. His father in his dreams is the memento, is the vision. The dagger is just a representation of something his father gave him, but the way he's been using it is the exact opposite of what Thor's wanted. So is that really a memento of your father if you're not using it the way he wanted you to use it? Is it more of an insult to your dad than anything? So that's all fascinating, right? So I really loved that. So thank you, Rainhead of Shadow Clan. That was really cool to note. Alexander Q talks about the symbolism of Thor's not falling. Like when they're both being, like the bodies are coming up and grabbing them, Thorfin falls into the chasm, but Thor's does not. Thor's stands there. Thor's bears the weight of the dead, like what Thorfin ends up doing. But at the beginning, Thorfin does not do that. So I thought that was really cool. And then Einar. It was really neat that Alexander Q noted that Einar fighting off the retainers. Yeah, this is Einar, who couldn't fight off the guys that were attacking his mother and sister. But yet in the span of time, he's able to fight off the retainers. Again, showing that Einar was stronger than he looks, but he has that knowledge of the past, and he's moved forward and developed as a character as well, and is learned from his past and cares for Thorfin, so he's fighting for him as well. Sacha had some really cool comments in their thing on Patreon, but the one that stood out the most was last reaction. I was like, oh, well, how tall is Thorfin? Is he like, what, 5'7"? Because I'm 5'8". No, Sasha says that canonically Thorfin is 5'1". 5'1", y'all. And there's nothing wrong with that, but my mind was kind of blown because I watch Attack on Titan, and Levi, who's like one of the big characters, he's 5'2". So, and he looks so small in comparison to other characters. So Thorfin is an inch shorter than Levi. I need to put like a size comparison up here at some point to show like what that means. But that's so, he is a short king. Thorfin is our short king. He's not gotten any taller from when he was a feral, little wolf child. And now he's 5'1", but a short king indeed. We'll stand behind him. Also, Ecclesiastes, I know I'm saying it wrong, but Sasha pointed out that as a philosopher and as his verses in the Bible are often noted as being very cynical and him being very nihilistic, which fits Canute perfectly, right? It fits our boy Canute quite well. But also they were asking me, they said, you were going to say a quote from Monster in the last episode. You never said it. I forgot what was the quotation. I was going to say that the quotation from Monster that I think applies to this series very well is a quote from an episode early on. And I'm not very far into Monster, so I'm sure there'll be other quotations I can say later that would apply. But it's the quote saying that it's easy to kill people if you can forget the taste of sugar. And in this last episode, Thorfin is just learning what sugar is. He's never had that taste of sugar before, ever since his childhood. And now he's getting that back into his life and realizing the beauty and sweetness that life can give you. And so it deters him from violence, whereas Canute is trying to get away from sugar. He's trying to he's taking the taste of sugar away from him so that he can forget. Like, he's not acknowledging his brother and sister. He's not calling them brother and sister anymore. He's saying King Harald and saying, Estrid. He's not calling them by, sibling terms anymore. He's pushing himself further away from them so that if he has to kill them, it doesn't affect him emotionally, which is rather interesting. Sasha points out that technically Harald could have had kids in the past. We don't know. But the no heirs line could mean that there could have been children born to him in the past. They just aren't alive now. And yeah, this is like the early thousands. So, child death, stillborn children, like children dying before they're even teenagers, was not an uncommon thing at that time. So that's a fair point. So Harald may have very well had children to his wife or wives or whatever, but there are none around right now that could be his heir. So that we know of. Watch there be I'm waiting for there to be an here's the thing, Canute is isolating it to where he's the only one that can theoretically be the leader by blood. And I'm just waiting for a bastard child to come out of the woodwork and then be like, oh, that's Harold's kid. And Canute being like, we have to kill him. And watch that kid somehow finds their way to Thorfin and Einar, and Thorfin and Einar are like, guess we're raising a baby. And it turns out to be the heir of Denmark. Get all soap opera on this. Why not? So yeah, I'm just waiting for that to happen. But yeah, so Harald could have had heirs born to him, but they're not alive right now that we know of. And then also Canute, Sasha said that Canute and Thorfin have the same goals, just are looking at different ways of achieving them. I agree and disagree with that a little bit. And again, I'm only going by what I know now. So if y'all know secret knowledge I don't know about, please don't spoil me. Don't be like, oh, well, later their goals will line up. No, please don't tell me that. But at the moment, Canute's goal is to create a utopia. And his means of creating a utopia where, everything is under one rule, is by using violence. It's using violence to force everyone into the state that agree with him, because that's the only way he knows that will lead him to that goal. That's all he knows to be the tried and true method. And Thorfin does want, I think, a world without slavery and violence. I think that's where Sasha's getting at, that it's a utopia. Thorfin wants the world to be without slavery and violence, and to him, that would be Vinland. That would be the utopia, right? Because that's what Vinland's always been described as, is this place where everything is equal and people are free, right? So I guess I do agree that, yes, they do want the end goal to be the same. The ways that each of them are going about it are vastly different. And I guess that's what you are meaning, Sasha. But I think my thing about it is, I don't think that it is attainable the way either of them are going about it now. I think Thorfin is going the very idealistic route that, yes, theoretically, it would be awesome if there were no slavery and no violence. That would be amazing. That would be utopia. But we know as the audience that it's not that simple, and that is not going to be, that's like the extreme. And Thorfin's going to maybe have to find a way to balance, like, okay, when do we have to use violence? Do we have to use violence? Attack on Titan has very similar themes to this. Like, is there a time when violence is necessary? What do we do about that? How do we choose? What does this morally say about us? Like, there's all ramifications. It's complicated. And Thorfin, I feel, is going to have to find a balance for him in order to enact that justice that he wants. Canute, though, I think Canute is far off the mark. Like whereas Thorfin is very idealistic, Canute is way, way too on the mark with the violence angle, because violence does not beget peace. Not true peace, right? I think that's the message, is that Canute thinks he can just stronghold his way into victory, but we as the audience also know that if you force people into a corner, they're eventually going to bite back. And you may think you have this eternal reign, but there is no such thing. You will eventually lose the throne. And what will be left on your heart and your conscience and your soul by the end of it. So it's fascinating, right? There needs to be a balance between the two. And I feel like Thorfin is going to eventually find that balance, and that's what the story is going to be about. But Canute is getting further from the balance and getting into the extreme of it. And I think it's just, Canute, his character is so much more interesting in this season as a Shakespearean villain. Canute was the pretty boy prince, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. But now I'm like, no, he's like, him as a villain is just like, I'm here for it, because he's so complicated and layered, and I love that about it. So yeah, I've loved this season so far, and I'm excited to see more. So we're not going to waste any more time. I've talked way too long, but we are going to start episode 11 of Vinland Saga. Thank you all for the comments and the kind words, but we're going to start episode 11 of season 2 of Vinland Saga here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Man, so the threads are aligning, aren't they? Yep. I really actually, when this episode was going on, I was like, oh, this is just gonna be like a filler-esque episode where there's gonna be not much going on. We're maybe doing this, but no. On the surface, it looks like that. On the surface, it looks like, oh, this is just a transitional episode. It's a filler episode. No, there is actually a lot being set up here that is rather interesting, that is just kind of like glossed over and just it's just not given a lot of attention. And unless you're really thinking about it, it's very easy to just be like, oh, it's just this happening. But no, there's a lot happening under the surface with this episode that I was like, oh, we're setting lots of things up. So we apparently we're not going to wait very long for Canute and Thorfin to maybe meet up with each other. That might be the midway point, is that they confront each other and be like, oh, hey, how's it been the last 10 years or whatever? What's been going on? Which it's not been 10 years, but it's been a solid, 5 or 6 years. Like, what's been going on with you? So interesting. There's lots of little things being set up. We're gonna put that over here. The big the setup here. The setup, and I feel like I was gonna put red herring, but we're gonna wait on that because I think that there's some interesting things going on. We have a pretty big intro here before we even get to the OP. For a second, I thought we weren't gonna get an OP, and I was like, we're getting into that kind of episode. But kings and swords. So we've got the setup here, and then I guess themes. We're gonna put those over here. Some thematic things. So the idea that is put forth here is that kings are like swords. And it's a very odd metaphor for Canute to say for various reasons. We'll talk about that. But yeah, kings and swords is our episode title here. And so we have the girl that gave water, the freckle-faced girl. She is like, came out here. She's a servant. It looks like she's wearing the same thing that Arnheid is wearing for Canute's sister. Canute's sister, who looks very, very much like Canute when he was younger, right? His sister, and Wolf. So I get the impression that Wolf likes Estrid. I get the impression that Wolf is trying to impress Estrid, that he likes her. I'm like, And I have the feeling that Canute knows that, and he's using it against Wolf. It's rather interesting. I'm rooting for you, Wolf. I wouldn't marry into this crazy family. You'll probably die, but wouldn't marry into the family if I were you, but go for it. But yeah, she was like, I can't believe my brother. And so we have Canute there with all of the armor on. What's kind of cool about this situation is it is the setup. We'll talk about the setup, but it's also this theme, and I'll leave some room for the kings and swords. But there's a part here where we had Canute, Canute bundled up as a kid by Ragnar for protection, right? To the point where Harald was like, he doesn't need all that on him, Ragnar, he's fine. But then you have Canute now that has all the armor as protection. But I don't think it's just for protection, right? I think it's a cool parallel that you have him as a kid all bundled up to the point where there's so much on him, and now as an adult he's training with it. But I think that it's the layers for Canute are a training method, right? It's like Goku in Dragon Ball Z, where he's wearing the weighted clothes, and him and Piccolo take off the clothes, and they weigh like 10 kilos each, and they just sink into the ground, right? And it's to make their movements more agile when he's not wearing them. And if you notice, throughout a lot of the other scenes that we've seen him in, he's not wearing a lot of armor. So if he's able to move incredibly fast and agile while in all of these layers, then once they're taken off, he will be just that much stronger and more agile. So I really think it's a training method. I think it's to get Canute. I think Canute is doing it to train himself, but it's also a very cool symbolic moment because it's paralleling him as a kid. And so Wolf goes back to him, and he does a good job, and people note, like, oh, he can dodge Wolf's attack. That's pretty impressive. Which Canute's not ever been, Canute's a good fighter in this, but his sister is kind of amazed by all of it. And we'll talk about that they're all kind of like, some of them are clapping and saying, oh, he actually dodged that. His Majesty moves well for someone so heavily armed. So it's not only a training method, it's not only symbolic, but again, we'll talk about Canute. And I'm going to put Canute here, kind of as Canute as an aside. I'm going to put Canute as an aside here. Canute, it's all about perception with him. He wants those guys watching to make a comment like that. Like, wow, he can move so well for someone so heavily armed. Like, he has kind of a handicap here and he's still able to hold his own. It is all about perception. And Wolf says that to him, like, as a lesson, but I think Canute already knew. Canute already knew what Wolf was trying to tell him and trying to teach him, and he was putting his own spin on it. That's the thing. Because, yeah, Canute's wearing all of this armor, not only for symbolism, not only for setup that he's been training, but also to fool the audience watching into being impressed by him. Like, wow, he's doing well even with this handicap. And Gunnar says, well, you know, Wolf's taking it easy on him. And Estrid doesn't really think so. She's like, are those real swords? And she's all concerned about it. And she's like, is this really practice? And then, of course, Gunnar shows up. Gunnar is so weaselly. He's such a weasel. He just shows up like, like he's like Salacious Crumb. He just shows up like kind of weaselly. And Estrid's like, oh, well, here in the Japanese, she says doki doki, which refers to like your heart pounding. But here they translated it to I'm on pins and needles, right? That she's just so concerned about him. She's like, oh, this is so scary. And he's like, oh, well, Wolf is a skilled swordsman, so he's going to know how to control himself and hold back so he doesn't seriously injure his majesty, right? But it looks pretty real, right? And she's like, it doesn't look that way to me. And she says, I can't believe this. My brother used to hate even touching swords. So, yeah, the idea that, again, to show the difference between Thorfin and Canute going from hating swords to acting as a king. And again, that ties to this theme, go up here, about kings and swords. Because at one point here later on in this match, Canute just throws down his sword and Wolf gets onto him like, hey, don't throw your sword down. Take better care of it. So the question is, does he really like being king and the power? Or is this just the only way he sees his goal being accomplished? And I think it's the latter. What's so fascinating about Canute as a character and as an antagonist, and he's kind of like, he reminds me a lot of Soooooo from Yona the Dawn. If you've not read Yona the Dawn, it is a shoujo, but it is fantastic. It's like the Vinland Saga of shoujos. It really is. I love Yona the Dawn. It has very similar themes, very similar characters. Not quite as angsty as Feral Thorfin, but it's got a really great cast of characters. But one of the characters in there is very layered like Canute. And I love the idea that Canute doesn't necessarily want the crown just for the power alone. He's not greedy just for the power because he thinks he deserves it, but he sees it as the only way to accomplish his goal. He's like, this is the route I found. I may not be crazy about it, but it's making me crazy, and it's the only way I know to achieve my goal. So I'm going to double down on it, lean in, and ride this out until I get what I want. And Canute's smart and methodical, and it's working for him, so he's just going to keep it up. But I like that Estrid kind of sees through him, right? And I'm wondering if that's another reason why he killed Harald. Because Estrid seems like she sees right through Canute. She's like, he didn't like swords as a kid. He's not someone that really truly likes violence. And the question is Canute still that person she remembers that doesn't like violence, but this is all he knows? It's kind of like a obligatory Attack on Titan spoilers. It's a Eren Yeager moment where this is the only way he knows to get what he wants, so he doesn't want to do it, but he's gonna do it sort of situation. End of Attack on Titan spoilers. Or is it that, as Gunnar says, his royal blood has awakened in England? Like, he reached his sexual awakening, as you could say, in England. Like, is it that scenario, or is it just Canute acting? I want to say I think it would be more compelling if it was Canute acting. That Canute has gone so far into the game, so far into the act, that it's becoming reality. Like, you lie so much that it becomes your truth sort of scenario. And I think that makes him a more compelling character. I like Canute more as a villain, like that's Shakespearean and has all these layers and complexities to him, than just a guy that's like, I want power, and that's his only gig. I like that. I like what the story is doing with Canute. It's making him maybe not sympathetic, but more layered, right? And that's so good. And Gunnar says a king must be strong. Norsemen won't listen to weaklings. And these guys, when Canute gets backed up against the wall, they are judging. They are hardcore judging. They are just giving him the most judgmental stares. But yeah, Gunnar's like, they're not going to listen to him unless he's strong. That's just the Nordic way, right? That's how the military works. He has to prove that he has strength. And Estrid she says he seems like he's in a lot of pain. Estrid can see through him. She sees through him and believes that Canute doesn't like this. And God, again, Attack on Titan, it's a character comparison. I didn't think I'd be comparing Eren to Canute, but it's there, yeah. The idea of someone seeming something that they're not. So yeah, I worry for Estrid. I do. I worry for Estrid and I worry for Wolf, because as we have seen with Canute, he ain't afraid to kill family. He's 2 for 2 right now, and Estrid's number 3, and Wolf seems to like her. So or at least that's Canute's assumption, is that Wolf has a fancy for her. So I worry for Estrid. Estrid's very pure. Pure people don't last long in this series unless you develop that purity over time, like Thorfin, and you have to go through hell to get there. And not many other characters in this series are going to fall into that category. But yeah, I worry for Estrid because I feel the problem is I think Estrid is eventually going to vocalize her thoughts about Canute, and she's going to corner him and be like, hey, you really aren't like this. Like, Canute's going to act a certain way. She's like, you're really not like this. You're actually, my brother is more like this. And Canute's going to think, I got to kill her because I can't have people thinking about me this other perception that might actually be true. So I worry about her. I worry about Estrid a lot. I'm fearful for her future, but she seems to know her brother more so than Gunnar, and I am a little concerned about that. But yeah, and Wolf says retreating when you're tired is a bad habit of yours. And in this battle, he says retreating is not the answer. A king fights by advancing and cutting his way through his enemies. He has to win. He can't just keep retreating because that just gives the enemy more time to get stronger and fight back. Yeah, so that's the Nordic philosophy here. But what I like about it is that Canute, again, it's like a play within a play moment where Canute, he retreats and seems to withdraw, but then he uses his words. He uses words to distract and then strikes. He uses a snake tongue. He uses a snake tongue to distract. And what has also been represented through a snake? Askeladd. So it's very interesting because there's a couple moments in here that seem like an Askeladd moment, like that one there where Canute waited until he could use his words to get Wolf into a vulnerable position and then strike back. That was a very Askeladd moment. But then there's a moment later on when he's talking to Gunnar that I was like, if Askeladd's rolling in his grave right now listening to you. Like, we'll get to that moment. But I was just like, no, Canute! No, you should have listened, or Askeladd should have told you. And so, yeah. And then that's when he says, I'm sure you've noticed my sister's watching. That's why you started attacking more aggressively. She seems lost in conversation with the man beside her. And he turns to look. And that's when he throws the shield. So, yeah. So, I didn't say Gunnar. He said the man beside her. So, Wolf turns to see the man because he's like, who's talking to Estrid? Like, yeah. I am fully convinced that Wolf has a crush on Estrid. Wolf likes Estrid, the queen, the king's daughter. And Dude, sometimes marrying into a royal family is not a good idea. You don't need that crazy in your life. I also love that he opens his eyes up when he sees the shield coming at him. Like, at that moment, he's like, clever girl. And, like, takes his shield and bats it away. It's fantastic. I love it. It's a great moment. So, yeah. And then he gets the sword to his throat and concedes. The first out of 6 victories. So he lost 5 times and he won 1, right? And I like this one guy's like, yeah, like, go Canute. Like, they all seem pleased. They're like, well, okay. Well done. Nicely done, your majesty. And again, it's about perception. Canute maybe was backed up against a corner, but he acts like he's not. He was backed up against a corner, but he takes advantage of the situation, notices his sister's there, uses that, and then everyone watching thinks that it was all premeditated and planned, when in reality, Canute's just flying by the seat of his pants. It was not a premeditated plan. He just lucked out, right? And the guy says, I'm amazed. He may have only won 1 in 5 bouts. Okay, so 1 out of 5. But he made Wolf admit defeat. And they're like, didn't Wolf look away at the end? Like, they're all speculating, but Wolf is clearly respected. And so they're like, And then he starts taking everything off. Like, I love the idea of Canute stripping the layers off. Again, symbolism. He throws the sword aside. Like the first thing he throws aside is the sword. And if we're saying swords are kings, that shows that the kingdom is the thing he's least concerned about. Which is fascinating because everything he's doing is affecting everyone's lives, and it's something he's just doing to meet an agenda. Like, for him, he's like, whatever. I'm just doing this to get my goal. It's fascinating, right? Okay. And then he strips off the layers. And I like that Wolf's like, you mustn't throw your sword. Like, don't throw away this kingdom so fast, so easily. And then Gunnar's like, oh, it's impressive. Again, Gunnar's like, diet Ragnarok. He's like, what do you want? I prepared the documents for the matter you asked me to investigate. We can review them in your room later. And I like that Canute has a case of helmet hair, but it makes him look like Thorfin. It does. Like, Thorfin has the long flowing hair now, and Canute has the little shaggy hair, just like Thorfin did. It's just like they've just gone in opposite directions. It's fascinating, right? It's great. So, okay. I want to talk about this scene where he says there aren't too many wealthy men. I want to talk about this scene here. The setup with this, right? Okay. He says there aren't too many wealthy men. And then Gunnar's telling him, even if we were to squeeze any of the men listed, we'd get at most 3,000 pounds a year. Besides that, our only option is to raise taxes on the overall population. So they need funds. That's what they're realizing. So right now they have an army of Danes in England that is funded by England. I can't imagine why the English would be mad. And so they're realizing that all this is doing is fueling discontent. It's fueling discontent by the English funding an army that's not theirs. That's not their own, right? And Canute's like, okay, so he has realized that what he needs is more funds from Denmark to kind of placate the situation. To kind of like mull it over. But the problem is, as we're finding out, there's not too many wealthy Danes. Not too many philanthropists in the Nordic culture that are willing to be benefactors, right? It's a bit different than England. And so their options are to tax more. I kept thinking of Prince John and Robin Hood, right? Now all I can picture is like Einar and Thorfin as, oh my God, Einar and Thorfin would be Little John and Robin Hood. That's it. Can we do this? They know how to shoot an arrow, bow and arrow. Are we setting up Robin Hood? Are we doing that in this show? Are we setting up Einar and Thorfin to be Big John and Robin Hood? Are we setting that up? Can we please? And then Canute's like, King John, can we set that up? Come on, mangaka. But yeah, they say their only option is to raise the overall tax. He says, I'd recommend that one. Kettle, son of Spherical. He's a wealthy farmer who owns a large swath of land in the south. Okay. So we establish a map here that we'll put Kettle down here. Kettle has a large swath of land in the south. Okay. So we're getting a little bit of geography here to go along with this. I don't see the family's military forces listed here. Without visiting them in person, it's hard to say. So there's not a large military presence. Yeah, because Kettle's been paying him off. He's been paying, he paid off Harald all these years to not have people be drafted from his island, or his land, to not have to deal with military presence. He's like, he didn't want to deal with any of that, so he just bribed Harald not to do it. And Harald was like, sure, we'll take it. But Canute operates a little differently, right? Harald seems more like Kettle in hindsight. And so I can see Harald being like, sure, you give us some food, we'll leave you alone. Canute's not like that. Canute looks at things very emotionlessly, which is good and bad. And he says, we need those numbers. Look into it and report back to me. Okay, so he says, look into it and report back to me. So it is possible that Gunnar is going to visit Kettle's farm, but not Canute yet. Okay, so if Gunnar goes to Kettle's farm to investigate and takes like Thorgil with him or something, because that seems legit, or Olmar, then if Gunnar sees Thorfin and realizes who he is, he might go back and tell Canute. Or if this big, coup or presence breaks out and Thorfin's like, I'm not fighting for you, I stand for peace now, Gunnar may go back and tell Canute, and Canute's like, the fudge you say, and then we go from there. So getting options, but it doesn't seem like Canute himself is going to go to Kettle's farm. That's too out of his way. That's way too out of his way. He's got kingly things to do. But we'll send Gunnar to go do it. Send him on a road trip. Right? He says yes. All right. He says either way, we'd be raising taxes significantly. Right after you've been crowned the king of Denmark. So yeah, so that does, I wanted to point this out. That does look bad because you have Canute becoming king. You have Canute becomes king and taxes instantly raise. That's not going to look good on him. You want the people to support you. And so if you instantly raise taxes the moment you come into power, that doesn't look too good. It sows a little discontent amongst the moral. He's like, I'm concerned there'll be backlash. Like Gunnar's like, there could be a riot. There could be a riot. I'm just saying. But Canute says part of governing is making sure that doesn't happen. So he's like, well, if we're a good government, we'll make sure that there's not a backlash. I'm like, okay, that's a fun phrase. He says we have options. And before we get to those options, I love the black cloak with the crow feathers on it. Oh, that looks like, in the OP it's red and it gets even more red because of the blood. But here I love just the black cloak with the crow feathers. It's so villainous, right? Because we see Thorfin in like the light colors. But here it looks like such a villain's robe. It like looks like he's getting ready to sing his own Disney villain song. I'm like, which Kensho Ono can sing. So he very well could do that. But yeah, I love with the crown and everything. I love it. And the way his hair is cut, it's short, but it looks longer underneath the cloak. So in the OP, I kept thinking his hair was longer. I guess it was shorter, and the cape just made a visual illusion, right? So his problem is that he needs funds. He needs money. Sven's been fighting a war this whole time, using money left and right. Now that the war's over, what do we do? He says we need to secure new funds. He says even after conquering England, he kept a Danish force directly under his control stationed there. Because here's the problem. This wouldn't have been such an issue if you had two kings. Because if you had Harald over Denmark and Canute over England. The problem is that Canute is spreading himself too thin. He's trying to be the king over all of this land, but he can't be at all of the land. So he's in Denmark, but he sent this force to go occupy England. Well, England doesn't like that because they're like, oh, the king's not even here. We're just an army. We're just in a militarized state. What? And the problem is that they established back in season 1, they established that there was a king. I'm trying to remember the king who worked with the people. Yeah, there was a king that worked with the people and was negotiating seemingly with both sides, but he died. Right? And then the English king that took over was no good. So yeah, so that was maybe it was a Danish king and Sven took over and it was no good. There was a king before either the English king that fought against Sven or before Sven that was the people favored because he was trying to negotiate both sides and talk about compromise, things like that. But he died and then we ended up in this war. But there's also this idea of Askeladd. Askeladd was saying back in season 1 to Thorfin at Stonehenge, or the stone, like the columns and everything. It wasn't Stonehenge, but it was like the columns. He was talking about how the Romans, even when they invaded, they shared resources, knowledge, and worked with the people to make it better. Like, Askeladd had a deep reverence for the Romans because he's like, they came in and they didn't just conquer and just leave it in a militarized state and not do anything to benefit the people. Like, they negotiated with the people, they become one with the people, they engaged with the people, there was communication and dialogue and technology and culture shared, and it became a melding pot that became it took a situation of occupation and conquering, but then made it to where they acknowledged the culture of the people, but also expanded upon it. And that's what Askeladd told Thorfinn. He's like, there's a way this can all work if it's done properly, but the Danes don't know how to do that. So that was his grand thesis. It was like the foreshadowing that Askeladd actually hates the Danes because he's like, they're all a bunch of savages, and this is how it goes. So it's like, I almost wish that Askeladd had gave that speech to Canute as well as Thorfin, because I don't think he gave it to Canute, or if he did, Canute hasn't listened or remembered it. Because I'm like, I wish he told Canute that, because I feel like Canute is setting up to shoot himself in the foot. Because he spread himself too thin. He got greedy for power and paranoid that it would get taken away from him and he wouldn't be able to accomplish his goal. So he's trying to control this vast amount of land on his own, but he can't be two places at once. Right? He could be if he kept his brother alive, but we didn't do that. And so I like that some of the coins are like this black silver and there's gold. The cost of maintaining such a force was being paid with English taxes. And then from there, which contributed to the discontent of the English. Yeah, they're not happy about it. They don't see the need. So, unless he could squeeze funds from Denmark, his other territory, then he would be forced to downsize his stationed army. So, he doesn't want to downsize the army presence in England because he's not there and the English could riot and rally against them. But he doesn't want to get them riled up further by keeping on paying the army with English funds. So he's got to find a way for Denmark to pay for it. So it's like, but if he would have gone to England and negotiated and did the same route that prior rulers have done in the past, there's a chance that this problem wouldn't be so bad. But he's not doing that. So it's just creating an issue. And so it's leaving him with a conundrum. You say we have options, but what are they exactly? He says, bringing more land under our control. He's like, by developing it? That would take some time, like clearing trees, like getting more land. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? What's going to happen? He says, we'll acquire more farmland without developing the virgin land. And he's like, you mean requisitioning it? And he's like, Your Majesty, you're not considering that, are you? And he's like, we need the money. We need the money. We've no choice but to be somewhat heavy-handed in our approach. It's better than sowing discontent among the people by raising taxes. And he's like, if you've got a better suggestion, I'm all ears. And Gunnar's like, well, no, of course I don't, because he's like, what about drawing down the army? He's like, instead of going and trying to conquer more land and taking it over, what if we just downsize the army? We wouldn't have to owe all the money. Maybe that. And Canute says no. He says that's out of the question. He's like, I'm their conqueror and a Dane. The English will never look favorably upon me. And that's the part where I was like, but Askeladd just gave Thorfinn an example of how that happened. Like, the Romans conquered, Wales, but they developed it and worked with the people. So that wasn't the case, right? And not to say that he's wrong to think that, but to completely rule out any option of negotiation, of any option of cooperation, of any option of making yourself look favorable to the English people, to completely, without question, just outright throw it out the window without even considering it. Because here's the thing, Thorfinn is a prime example of someone that's done what Canute says will never happen. Thorfinn worked with an Englishman, Einar, who thought of Thorfinn as a conqueror and a Dane, because he is, and looks favorably upon him. So it's like Canute, the things that Canute thinks are not even possible are things that we as the audience are seeing happening or have been told have happened. So it's almost like Canute is his own worst enemy here, because he's not even seeing something as being an option when we, the audience, know that it very much is. So that's so fascinating. Yeah. And he just looks back at the army and says, an army under my direct control is what allows me to govern the region. I mean, yes, this is true, but it's not your only option. Kings are like swords. What can a king without military might accomplish in this world? And that, I feel like Thorfinn is going to become the answer to that question. I'm going to draw my little crown, our short king, Thorfinn. What can a king without military might accomplish in this world? I feel like Thorfinn, in his quest for peace, is going to be the answer to that question. Because hell, Thorfinn may get like a Forrest Gump style gathering on his own. Like I'm just picturing like in Forrest Gump, you have Forrest running with his long hair and his hat on and everybody's following behind him because they're just so curious about this. I feel like Thorfinn, if he plays his cards right, he could get a cult following. That'd be kind of cool. I would love for Thorfinn to go from being like a nobody that no one knew in Askeladd's army to being like this leader of this big giant movement that is in direct opposition of Canute. And if he went to England, if Thorfinn went back to England and like people there started like really liking him and it developed this like following there among the English, and they fought back against the Danish army that were occupying them, and then Canute had to pay attention, that could be really cool. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but I like the idea that he asked this question, and we, the audience, know that Thorfinn is trying to do the exact answer to it. So that's so fascinating. I'm excited to see if he actually if we get that connection. So then, yeah. So then we have the OP. I feel like in the next few episodes we're going to get an OP change, but I don't want to know when it happens. I want it to just happen when it does. So yeah, so we get the timeline. Our timelines are all syncing up. So long-haired Thorfinn and Einar are pretty much around the same time as this. So our timelines are starting to sync, right? Because Kettle shows up right as Harald dies, like a week later. And apparently it takes like over a week to get there back and forth. So it's not an easy feat. And Kettle's like, well, damn it, I brought all this stuff here. I brought 3 ships worth of things. And Kettle thinks that he'll just give the offerings to Canute and things will go his way. And the problem is that things do kind of go his way, but Canute is a very strategic, snaky leader. And he is plotting and planning on using Kettle's farm as a requisition. He's like, and a requisition is when you take over something, when you just come in and take it. So he's like, we're going to take over and militarize his farm and do whatever we want with it and the people there. And it's going to be a state to help out the people of the rest of Denmark. It's just part of the effort, the war effort, right? I keep wondering if he will ever go back on Wales and try to take it over and go against what he promised Askeladd he wouldn't. I feel like that would be the nail in the coffin of bad karma against Canute. If Canute goes back on his promise to Askeladd, like the ghost of Askeladd is going to be like, what did I tell you, you bitch? And so, yeah. But what I like is that Thorgil's like, oh yeah, Olmar's run around somewhere. And Kettle's like, no, he's 20 years old. He's a child. Even though Thorgil says, he's like, no, my son is a baka. He's an absolute idiot. He's a spoiled brat. At least Kettle is self-aware. At least Kettle is very self-aware of how his son actually is. And God, yeah. And who does he bump into? Before we get into whole bug eyes and that madness, before we dive into that, Olmar, I have to say, if you've not read The Outsiders, please do. It's by Hinton. It's great. S. Hinton writes it. It's just a classic American literature, but it's all about these greasers with their hair slicked back, and they're kind of delinquents, and they talk real tough, but inside they have lots of insecurities. And that's basically Olmar. I'm like, Olmar talks such a tough game, but he's the guy that like tried to grow his mustache out, and it's just not quite working, but he's going all in on it because that's all he knows. I'm like, Olmar, sweetheart. Like, he is trying to act so badass and cool, and it's just like secondhand embarrassment. But then Bug Eyes. Old Bug Eyes. We're going to call him Bug Eyes. I freaking love Bug Eyes already. And I love him because he's self-aware too. But the moment we saw him, I'm like, he kind of looks like Discount Thorfin. He kind of like, he has the same goatee and all of that. Olmar styling his hair as he like drops the sword is just the dumbest thing. It's so dumb, but I freaking love it. I love that he's like combing it back. He reminds me a lot of, oh God, it's in Yu Yu Hakusho. Kuwabara. Yes, thank you. He's like one of my favorite characters in Yu Yu Hakusho. My mind's gone blank. But yeah, Kuwabara. He reminds me of him in Yu Yu Hakusho, where he just has like the pompadour and slicks it back, and he's just kind of like a mess. Yeah, and then I love that Kettle shows up and is like, you're a baka and I hate you. Like, what is your problem? And I love that he's just like, here, have this money. Leave us. My son is an idiot. And Bug Eyes is like, oh my gosh, really? But my heart broke. The moment he says dad, I was like, and then it's Leif Erikson. That's his dad. So, he adopted Bug Eyes and says his name is Thorfin. And he's like, but everybody calls me Bug Eyes because he doesn't have really big eyes. But at first I felt really sad because at first I thought that, oh my God, Leif thinks that this guy is Thorfin and took him in under the guise that that's who he is. But here's the thing. He calls him his son, and then we find out later from Bug Eyes that Leif keeps looking for Thorfin. So Leif knows this isn't Thorfin. He knows. But the sad thing is he's kind of like deluded himself to be like, well, you could be Thorfin, I guess. Even though he's still looking for the real one. It's really sad. It's actually heartbreaking. And I'm at least glad that Bug Eyes is okay with it. Bug Eyes is like, sure, I'll let you call me whatever you want as long as I get to eat food and be with you and hang out with you, Dad. Hang out with you, Pops. I mean, at least Bug Eyes is self-aware of what's going on and is okay with it. He may have been a slave himself and was like, well, you took me with you, so can't complain. I guess maybe that's the case. I like Bug Eyes as a character. I'm really excited for him to meet Thorfin. I want Thorfin to be a lot shorter than Bug Eyes, so it looks even more ridiculous. But yeah, I do like Bug Eyes, but he's such a weird character. And I'm glad finally somebody makes the Thorfin connection. Einar ain't making it, but I like that Kettle's like, Thorfin, we have somebody on our farm that's like that. And he meets all the criteria, which granted, Bug Eyes meets all the criteria too, but Bug Eyes is obviously not Thorfin. Leif just gets his hopes up. And yeah, and so he says, is he enamored with blonde hair and brown eyes? About the same age as this boy. And Kettle's like, yes, exactly as you say. He's shorter than him, though. And then I like that Bug Eyes is like, this again, Dad? Like he knows what's going on. Like Leif takes Bug Eyes with him everywhere and uses him as an example to be like, have you seen someone that looks like this? So yeah, Leif knows that that's not his son, that that's not Thorfin, but he's taken him on as his adopted son, knows he's not the real Thorfin, but is parading him around being like, and he calls him Thorfin so that when he says that name and somebody goes, oh, I know someone named Thorfin, he can try to weed him out. The problem is, he's actually found the guy that knows the real Thorfin, and the other guys on the ship are like, dude, we've done this a million times, we're not doing this anymore. And I'm like, do it one more time. So I would really love if Leif just went back with Kettle to his farm and saw Thorfin, but I don't think it's going to happen. It's just like, it's like the worst. I hate stories where this is like my least favorite trope where here's two threads that should be connecting and they're just going perpendicular to each other and they don't connect and you're like, no. And I'm like, I just want Leif to see him again before he dies. Leif's getting up there in years. I need Bug Eyes to take Leif to Thorfin before he dies. Like he meets every criteria. And Bug Eyes is like, it's probably just like what happened with me. Like, I kind of feel bad for Bug Eyes in that moment because Bug Eyes seems to be like, he wants Leif to like abandon this and like be like, I'm your son, right? You're not just, you can quit using me to find this other person. I feel bad for him. I do. But I'm also like, I want Leif to find Thorfin. And I'm like, you seem interested in him. And so, okay, he says yes. And he says, I've been looking for him. He's my friend's son who was enslaved. So good. So again, I like that he doesn't tell Kettle he's his real son or anything. He's like, no, it's my friend's son. This is my real son. My adopted son, Bug Eyes. But I feel bad that other guys don't want to go. They're like, this Thorfin is different. And he's like, no, I can't go along with you this time. You got to understand that. Because, yeah, it's just such a long journey. And he's like, if we get stuck down there before it turns to winter, we're screwed. So I'm like, I want Leif to see Thorfin again, but I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I'm just like, I want him to see him again before he dies. But then on the other hand, I'm afraid that if he goes to Kettle's farm, he will die. So I'm like, no. It's just such a bad case scenario. I'm like, what if a fight breaks out if he goes to Kettle's farm and he gets involved in it and gets killed? Like, what do we do with that? Thorfin's had such a great day. I don't want him to have Leif's death on his hands. So we cut back to them going to see Canute, and Kettle thinks that Thorgil has a lot of influence. And no, that's not the case at all. Canute just knows that Kettle's wealthy and wants to feel him out and see if he can be used. And Thorgil just is like, yeah, I guess. But yeah, no, Canute is more smart than that. I want to make note when we see Canute and all of them. Canute, if you ever did color theory or color rhetoric, I did some classes in college, and orange is usually a color that represents caution and warning. So Canute wearing it is like a sign that he's uncomfortable and like cautious of the situation. And then we have red, green, and blue that are like the fairies from Sleeping Beauty, which is kind of funny because they're all kind of bumbling in this, right? It's great. But yeah, Canute accepts the gift and says, yeah, we grew all these crops here on our own farm. And Canute's like, okay. He's like, the late King Harald was also pleased by my family's products. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. Pumpkins, watermelons. I have no intention of unnecessarily changing the way my father and brother did things. So yeah, Canute's not trying to shake the tree too much yet, right? He's doing it subtly. And anytime Canute smiles, I'm sorry, but anytime Canute smiles from here on in, he is lying. He is lying. Anytime he smiles, I don't trust Canute. Whenever he frowns and gets all grumpy cat, then I'm like, okay, the real Canute's coming out. Because Canute back in season 1 was kind of a diva. And you can't hide diva. No. Canute's trying to act all calm and cool, but I'm like, you're a freaking diva. You're just hiding it until you get into the shadows and talk to your dead father's head. Like, don't try to lie to us. So when he smiles here and he's like, oh, strong farmers like you are the treasure of Denmark. I'm like, bullshit, you are lying. They may be, but you don't really think that. You're just going to use them. Mm-hmm. Like, he's so smooth. He said, you should continue serving as the foundation of our nation's strength with pride. Yeah, foundation of our nation's strength. He's going to use you and abuse you, for sure. And Kettle's just like, yeah, sure. Okay, I'm real pleased. I appreciate your words, Your Majesty. Hope nothing scary is going to come of this. And then Olmar, sweetheart, the secondhand embarrassment from Olmar. I was living for it because I was like, you just knew Olmar was going to muck it up because he said he wanted to join his forces. And when he has him try to cut the pig, I love there's this quarrel between them in the background, and Gunnar's like, can you believe this? And it's like these country bumpkins. And I love the face of Ket when Olmar like tries to slice the pig. And I just love Thorgil's like, are we really gonna have him slice the pig? And Kettle's like, oh, please don't do anything embarrassing. And he like goes at it, and then the faces of them. I want to get like the face as he just like pokes that pig. And then Thorgil's just like not even looking. He's like, God, this is so embarrassing. And Kettle's just resigned himself. He's like, this is the worst day of my life. God, it's great. And Canute's like, no, that's fine. He says, Olmar, I'll consult with the captain regarding your request. And Kettle immediately goes to bed crying. He's just like, this is the most embarrassing day. Like, just, he immediately leaves. Like, if Arnheid, he's wanting Arnheid bad, just so he could tell her, be like, my son did the most embarrassing thing today in front of the king of Denmark. And Thorgil's like, the other soldiers are going to be teasing me for a long time about this, dude. Like, you've made a right old mess of things. Like, he takes the meat for himself and gives Olmar nothing except something to drink. And Olmar's just crying, and he's like, but this line from Thorgil, I actually really like this line. The more cowardly a man is, the less predictable his behavior. That's really a good line for this series, because back in season 1, there were lots of characters that we could ascribe to either projecting cowardice or acting cowardly, and they were unpredictable. Like, you didn't know what they were going to do. And that was kind of what made them so you had to be wary of them. So, or he says the more cowardly is the less predictable. So he's like, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you use it properly. And that's where we get the whole line from Canute later. Like, Thorgil treats it as a bad thing. He's like, you being cowardly means that you're just unpredictable and worthless. Canute doesn't quite think that way, though. And we cut directly, he says what's done is done. We cut directly from this scene back to Canute, right? Be careful not to do anything to embarrass our family further. Ha, 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 ha. Oh, and then, yeah, poor Olmar, he's just sitting there crying like so ashamed. And then we cut to Canute's study, where he says, men like him are common. All pride, no skill. And no understanding of their own abilities. Men like him are the first to die on the battlefield. I wouldn't want him serving under me. Like, Wolf is pretty strict as a military man. He's like, nope. But Canute's like, we need to think about this not in terms of military. We need to think of it in a different term. He says, let me hear your thoughts from another perspective. And in that moment when he says another perspective, it's like Wolf instantly knows what he's getting at. He's like, from a general's perspective, you wouldn't want someone like Olmar because he's likely weak and is going to be the first to die, and he's expendable, he's expendable without being functional. And Canute's like, but Wolf says, okay. And he opens his eyes up at that moment. He says that young man could be incredibly useful. And when he opens his eyes up, he looks so sad. Like, Wolf opening up his eyes is just like, he's like, we could use him. Someone like him would be easy to manipulate. Right? And he's like, you're right. He could be useful to us. He's a typical young Nord and a foolish one at that. He'd act as we expect him to. He'd do what we say and wouldn't ask questions. And Gunnar's like, okay, well, if we know that he's stupid and he's going to do what we say without questioning us or trying to figure anything out on his own, then are we going to go through with it? Are we going to carry on with the plan? And he says, yes, the coronation hasn't happened yet. He hasn't been officially made king, but we can't let the opportunity pass us by. Uh-huh. And he says, it's so the people can live in peace. I feel for them, but they must pay the price. Yeah, I'm just like, that line there, and he like swipes his hand over the scar from Thorfin. And there's so much you could take from that one gesture, right? He says, it's like you could take it a lot of different ways. On the one hand, you could say, like, you know, the Olmar and the people of Kettle's farm, like, they're going to have to suffer for the peace of everyone else. For my utopia, they're going to have to suffer. It's like Harald and Sven and the people I've killed. You know, I feel for them, but they have to pay the price because we have to live in peace. And then also when he wipes a thumb across his cheek, it's like, you know, Thorfin hated that you became a slave, hated that you went to the depths of despair, but, you know, for the rest of the kingdom to be at peace, you had to pay the price because you, like, attacked your king. And I had to become king. But also, you could look at it another way and say that Canute, he's like, I didn't want to kill Askeladd. I didn't want to do this. But in order to create my utopia so that people can live in peace and we don't have these stupid wars that I hate, then someone has to pay the price. All of the different things, all of the layered symbolism, that one gesture, that one shot, it's absolutely incredible. And I'm like, yes, please. Yes, give us that. The Kettle's farm will be the first that we requisition, the first that we order to be under our rule. Mm-hmm. So that does beg the question of if Kettle's farm was like even part of, I'm assuming it was part of Denmark to begin with. I had assumed that, but maybe not. Maybe Kettle's farm was not part of Denmark and that he was just bartering his freedom with Harald by supplying him with all these gifts so that they wouldn't invade and take it over. I am assuming. Could be wrong. But yeah, I love that you have Canute setting up that people will have to die for the sake of peace. Right? The lives of the few outweigh the lives of the many outweigh the lives of the few, right? And that's Canute's stance. Whereas Thorfin believes that there should be peace without death. So it's like we have to have death to have peace, or we can have peace without death. It's like two very conflicting ideologies. They both want peace, but they both have very, very distinct different opinions about how it can be accomplished. Or how it should be accomplished, right? With Canute, though, I get very Lord Farquaad vibes. Be like, some of you may die, but it's a price I'm willing to make. Like, he is literally Lord Farquaad in this moment, being like, yeah, you guys are gonna have to die, but it's for the sake of everybody else. So I'm willing to kill you all to make sure that happens. That will surely not cause any strife or backfire against you later, Canute. Surely not. I don't trust Wolf to not try and go against Canute eventually. I'm seeing the seeds being sown that I think Wolf is smart. Wolf is smart, and he will go along with the pack as long as it's for the pack. But my worry is that eventually Estrid will try to point something out about Canute that Canute is not wanting anyone else to know about, like his true feelings or true emotions about all this or etc. And Canute will feel obligated to kill her. And I feel like if Wolf loves the royal family and loves Estrid and doesn't right now think that Harald was poisoned, that's going to throw a big old kink into things and make things go from bad to worse. But I don't know. But this episode was really good. Really good. And there was so much happening. I really enjoyed it. I am really excited for the things it's setting up, but I'm not ready for Thorfin to get thrown back into the fire. We just got out of it. Him and Einar just bro hugged and got out of it. Now we're going to go back into it, aren't we? But we all knew this was coming, so I'm going to be very curious to see how Thorfin reacts now that he's had 3 years to meditate on what he wants to do without violence. I'm going to be very curious to see how he acts and reacts to this whole requisition and what ends up happening from there, and how Canute will react to Thorfin, how Einar will react in all this. I'm I just want Leif to meet up with Thorfin again before he dies. And for Bug Eyes to be there. Oh my god, what if Bug Eyes gets killed and Canute thinks it's Thorfin and Bug Eyes gets killed instead of Thorfin? Oh my god. I don't know, but I'm very curious to hear your thoughts down below. Please no spoilers, but I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. A real quick shout out to the members of our Patreon's philanthropy tier. Over on Patreon, there are 3 different tiers, and the top tier is the philanthropy tier, people who just donate extra money each month to help me do what I love to do, which is talk about these shows with you all. So a special thanks to these patrons on our philanthropy tier, Dana, to Edgar, to Tyrone, to Larry Manning, to Be Happy, to Arjo, to Shimoyama, to Anime Annie, to Truck, as well as Translucent Men. And I think I mentioned Kenny. But they're all up there. Thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate your support. I look forward each week to watching Vinland Saga, and you all help me to do that. So all of my love. Thank you. So yeah, we'll see what happens next week. I feel like there's not going to be an immediate cut to like drastic action against Kettle's farm. I feel like there's going to be at least another episode of setup, and then at the end of next episode, it's going to be like hitting all at once, but we'll see. This series has surprised me, so we'll see. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Vinland Saga.